Well, today we're going to answer some questions from one of our viewers, and they have to do with our Silkie chickens. So I wanted to say thank you to Larry for basically coming up with 4 questions. I think they're really good ones, and we decided to make this video about it to kind of walk through it and give our explanations. To be honest, before I even get into it, this is something I think that would actually be pretty fun going forward. So if anybody has any questions that they want answered
on any topic,
then definitely feel free to ask, whether it's on this video, whether it's on another video. It doesn't matter, because I think that's one of the fun parts of doing this. And if that helps you, that's awesome. So we're going to get right into it with question number 1. So question number 1, I think it's a pretty good one, and we really didn't sort of dive into it super deep yet. The short answer is yes, we do plan to run the Silkies using the same basic clan mating model or spiral breeding model that we used for our partridge chanticleers. We like that model. It works for a lot of things, and for us, it's going to work great for these chickens. Now, with that, we are planning to, in the future, have at least 4 breeding groups, so that we can do the spiral mating and do the swapping of roosters between lines. So very similar to our partridge chanticleers, the plan is to eventually, might change year to year, but have 1 rooster per group and about 6 hens. That's where we're hoping for, that's what we're aiming for. So that's sort of the base principle of what we're doing. So again, Larry, you were right. We have been keeping our different lines of Silkies separate. And over the summer months, that really hasn't been too taxing on us, but we're getting to that point where we've moved some of them into their winter coops, but we haven't moved everybody yet. And that is one of the big reasons why we made the switch from the larger fowl to the smaller ones, was we only have so much infrastructure available, and we only have so much infrastructure that's in good repair, because a lot of this has been moved and salvaged and all that fun stuff, and we just frankly haven't got there with everything. So in the future, the plan will be to run them out of separate coops and separate lines, identical to how we were trying to do the partridge chanticleers, but we're not quite there yet. And what I mean by that is we do technically have 4 roosters and 4 unrelated groups of hens, but one of our groups is only 2 hens and a rooster. And just because of infrastructure, and I mean, we're officially into winter now, we're thinking we might amalgamate some of those groups a little bit, which still allows for genetic diversity, so there's nothing wrong with that, and revisit getting our 4th group in 2024. We're pretty sure that's what we're going to do. Now, on the flip side too, and Stephanie's going to hate this, we also are aiming for a minimum of the 4 groups. Because they're so much smaller, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't in the future potentially have a 5th, etc. group.
Oh, you almost said a 6th.
We're still going to reduce flock creep, but if we can have what we were talking about doing with the partridge chanticleers, where some groups kind of are at that bigger size, sort of our ideal of 1 rooster and 6 hens, and maybe we do have a few that are smaller groups, we'll see how that goes. And the nice part of it is we can sort of play that by ear as we go. So the next question is actually something that we've wanted to talk about a little bit. We just haven't got there. So we're going to probably revisit this again in the future, but it has to do with eggs. So Larry asked a really good point. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but is it worth it for what you get? Because these eggs are smaller, and Silkies are not necessarily known as sort of the biggest producer of eggs. Now, when you look online, you'll find pretty much across the board that Silkies are supposed to be poor layers, and Silkies only lay 100 to 120 eggs a year, which sounds terrible. But that's not exactly what we're finding. Now, we have right now, it's the 22nd of December, so we are just past the shortest day of the year, and we don't use any artificial light. We have 20 hens that are old enough or at an age that they should lay. Now, 4 of those are older birds, which their egg production's already come down a little bit. But we're getting, on average right now, at a cold time of year with the lowest light levels, we're getting 9 to 10 eggs a day. And I'll try to hold them up here. This morning, I've already got 5. And we had a cold night last night. So one thing we've kind of noticed with them is they don't seem to be bothered by the cold weather and the short day lengths when it comes to laying eggs. So one thing we've been finding is we actually weighed these, but 3 of these Silkie eggs actually equals the same volume or amount of egg as 2 of the Chanticleer eggs, which isn't terrible when you think of how much smaller these birds are than the Chanticleers, and I'm going to say it, how much less they eat. That's actually pretty decent. And that's one thing that surprised us was for a bantam breed, the size of the eggs. Now, you still get variation, i.e. this is a bit smaller of an egg, but it's still a big egg for a very small bird. The final part to Larry's question was, will they give us enough eggs to feed our family? And the short answer is we think so. For us, we don't eat eggs every day, and we've changed some of our eating habits. We don't bake as much, etc. So on one side of the fence, we've kind of reduced a little bit our egg consumption. But when we do eat eggs as a family of 4, we're typically going through basically 8 to 10 of these eggs. So if that's what we're getting on average a day, we're basically still running right now in the positive as far as the number of eggs being produced versus what we consume. Because we've only kind of gone through the 1 year, and most of the birds we had for most of that year were too young to lay, what we're seeing is definitely looking promising, but it's a little different than the bigger birds. And we will say we're probably going to have a few extra hens to kind of meet what we would like to have for egg production. But for us, a lot of this kind of comes out in the wash when you start looking at some of the other factors and metrics that they're bringing to the table. And we're going to talk about that next. So now we're standing out in front of our 4th freezer, which we have outside, which is a whole nother dilemma. And small shameless plug here, if you haven't gone over to check out Pantry Living, our channel for basically cooking, canning, and everything pantry related, and that sort of content interests you, I definitely suggest go over and check that out, because we are in the midst of quite a bit of stuff over there too. But to come back to the next question, we're talking about meat. Now, Silkies are smaller. All bantams are smaller than standard fowl. And when you're talking about it from a strictly meat perspective, we will never be able to produce the same volume of meat without producing a lot more birds from the Silkies as we would with bigger birds. And at face value, that seems like a huge negative. But for us, we're changing the way our homestead functions. And we were basically finding that birds in general, but chickens in particular, are relatively taxing on feed and resources to produce that poundage. Even the conventional broiler birds, I mean, you need to purchase a lot of food to get that return. Not to mention purchase the broilers themselves. But with this, we definitely looked into the health benefits of Silkie over other birds, which I won't get into right now, but that's a huge factor for us. But when we do it like this, where we put basically 2 birds together, that will still feed us 2 to 3 meals, because we'll have the initial meal where we roast it and we basically eat roast chicken, but then we'll also have the broth and potentially a soup out of it as well. So it still goes a long way, partially because even though we are switching to a bit more of that keto, carnivore, whatever you want to call that diet, we're still reducing the volume of food we eat across the board. They really are actually meaty little birds. They're, I wouldn't say they're broad-breasted or that kind of thing, but there's a lot of meat on them. They're quite solid.
And the one thing that's nice about them is that they really aren't tough in the leg, even.
No, the dark meat is not what you think of. Even the leg meat isn't what you think of when you think of dark chicken meat. But we've also made the decision that the Silkies, because they produce the eggs and they produce a viable meat, are still very valuable, even if they're not as productive as some of the larger birds. But we find the rabbits, for example, are a far more economical for us way to produce the poundage of meat, and of course the sheep as well, but that's a whole nother discussion. And if you like sheep content, another shameless plug, go over and check out our life raising sheep channel, because we have been slowly migrating everything over to that channel that's sheep related. because what we're trying to do with Hickorycroft is focus it into the small backyard homestead type stuff that kind of everybody could do. And I think that's where Silkies excel, because these little birds, the carcass is quite meaty compared to the overall size of the bird. They're most of the time these are like 1.5 pounds. And one personal thing we definitely find is these little guys taste better. And even the kids, actually, when we ate our first one, it's weird blue, blackish colored meat, but it has a very different flavor to us, at least as a family, than the larger, more conventional chickens. So anyways, for us, it's a win-win. And kind of spoiler alert, we probably are still going to try to raise a very large number of these. So the next question has to do more with the discussion we started about confinement. And I think we've confused people a little bit, so I want to clear the air a little on this. We like the smaller birds because if we have to or want to, for whatever reason, they are much more content to be locked up in the space that we have. We could have done the same thing with the Chanticleers, but we would have needed a lot more indoor space, and that was a huge problem for us. As far as avian influenza goes, the last couple of years, it's always been a spring issue. And yes, I'm not going to go into the weeds on this, but when you look at most of the online information that's out there, the risk comes from wild birds, which makes sense why that risk comes in the spring and the fall. That being said, we are not keeping these birds locked up full time. In fact, we want to make sure that they can still go out. I mean, right now they're choosing to be in here with me because it's cold outside and there's not much to eat outside. But we still want to raise them the same way as much as possible. But if we have to, we can do it. Typically, it is a voluntary thing. It's not a mandate or anything like that to lock them up. But there has been warnings put out there in our area that for at least a couple of weeks in the last few years, it's strongly advised that you keep your birds locked up. Not getting into the ins and outs of that, if you really want to read into the policies that are available in Canada, the way I read it is your birds should be under cover where there is no access by wild birds, other people, other animals, everything, 100% of the time, which makes perfect sense when you look at it from an industry perspective, but doesn't quite make as much sense when you're looking at it on a small scale. So we're kind of making a compromise here, I guess would be the best way to put it. The avian influenza concern is definitely sort of the starting point of that, but there's other reasons why it's nice sometimes to be able to leave your chickens locked up for a day and not have them kill each other. Well, there you go. There is our answers to the 4 questions. And thank you again, Larry, for giving us those questions, because it was kind of fun to go through it. And hopefully it answered your questions. If not, let us know and we can dive a little deeper into it. So don't be afraid to ask. But on that note, we're going to end it here. And if you enjoyed this video and you found us in some other way, definitely like, comment, and subscribe, all that sort of stuff. Because the plan moving forward with the Hickorycroft channel is to really focus on the smaller scale stuff that we feel most people probably could do in some capacity. So we're looking forward to sharing that content with you and yeah, going forward into 2024.